Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us for a new session of Great Ideas. My name is Dan Dimitar, and I'm gonna be your host for today. We have a packed schedule for this entire event. We will be discussing a lot of new cool research, and it's been a month since our last event, which happened in July. So as you know, due to the entire pandemic and COVID situation, we cannot meet physically, at least for this time being. So thanks a lot for the beer compliments. So we had to move this event in the online. So I'm streaming from my grandmother's place. Right now, you might notice a place since like last month, and of course I'm in the nature, so you might hear some strange sounds. But anyway, we have an amazing schedule for today, and you can see it on your screens right now. We have 5 presentations, like there's gonna be like a crazy. We're gonna announce some APT campaigns, so stay an actor, so stay tuned with us. We will be giving 2 prizes for the best questions and most active speakers. So please be active, ask us questions, and you should be seeing the schedule right now on your screen. So ask us questions, and you should be fine. We want to also announce that SAS Online will happen on the 6th and 8th of October this year. And we are looking for submissions from the team, from all of you. So please submit your cool research. The entire agenda is not ready yet, so there's still time to submit your talk, to submit your cool presentation. If you want to find out more info about this, please visit our website, thesascon.com, or our Twitter accounts, or just ask us here. We can give you more info as needed. So, without any further delay, I would like to invite our first speaker for today, which is my great friend coming all the way from Australia. Noushin, are you here?
Hello.
Hello, Noushin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, it's good. It's a lovely evening here in Romania. I hope it's not too late for you.
No, I'm already in tomorrow. It's 27th right now.
Oh,
here
wow. Thanks a lot for staying this late to present your research with us. So let's start. Try to share your screen, and I think we should be ready to rock.
Just a second.
Yeah, Noushin is actually living in the future right now. She's living in the tomorrow. Okay, so we can see your screen, and I think we're ready to start.
Okay, let's start. So my topic for today is looking for sophisticated malware in IoT devices. This is research I've been doing for a while, and I thought it's good to share with you guys what I've been doing. So first of all, let's have a look at the IoT attack landscape. It started more than a decade ago that malwares for IoT devices were happening. First one, Hydra, which was a prototype for a malware for routers. And then after that, there were others. And also in the more recent years, we had lots of botnets. I'm sure most of you know about all of them and have heard about the botnets a lot. So I'm not going to get into more details about these attacks. There were also other researchers more recently about the malwares that could wipe down the firmware of an IoT device completely. Also other attacks targeting protocols like communication protocols that are used in different smart home appliances, like smart home devices like lights, smart lights. Also other attacks that happened on IoT devices using like targeting smart home hubs with unsecure communication protocols and also weak server verification and so on. But for today, I want to talk about more like hunting low-level sophisticated attacks in IoT devices. In particular, I want to take a closer look into the firmware of IoT devices and look for backdoor implants, any modifications to the boot process, also other malicious stuff in like different parts of the firmware. So for this reason, let's first look at the boot process of an IoT. So when you turn on an IoT device, this is like regardless of the CPU architecture, this is quite common. This is almost always the same. The boot process starts with the code on the chip on the device, which transfers the control to the bootloader. So bootloader is the first code that gets executed. It loads the kernel, and also after that, kernel mounts the root file system and then transfers control to the file system, to the user mode modules, and this is when the device is completely up and running and doing different functions. So also some common file systems and some common compression algorithms used in firmwares of IoT devices. These are some examples. There are much more, and there are lots of IoT devices that don't have these kind of common file systems or common compression algorithms. We will talk about them a bit later. Talking about the possible attack scenarios that take advantage of the firmwares of IoT devices. So as we learned about the boot process, when we look at the firmware binary, it also consists of the main modules, that the main components inside the firmware binary are also the bootloader, kernel, and also the file system, root file system. Each part can be targeted by an attacker. For example, the attackers can target bootloader and make like IoT bootkits. They can also target kernel space, like have kernel space malwares and also user space malwares. But there are different challenges when you start this kind of research. Let me talk about the challenges a little bit. So first of all, it's not easy to obtain a firmware. Why it's not easy? There are different ways to obtain a firmware, but each of them have their own challenges. First of all, sometimes you might need to have the firmware of a specific device, a specific version, the same device. You have a device, you want to investigate the firmware. So you need to know how to extract the firmware from the device. You need to have some experience with hardware hacking and that sort of stuff. And it's a complicated process. But anyway, that's the only way you can have access to the exact firmware. But this is not a very scalable approach to do this kind of research, because it's quite expensive to have all the devices. It's time consuming to go buy every device. And of course, you cannot have all the devices. So there are other ways as well. Sometimes you think that a network is compromised and you want to investigate the firmware that's been downloaded through that network. So you need to maybe like intercept the network traffic while the IoT device is updating itself. Again, there are like other techniques, other methods to get access to the firmware. The easiest one is to download the firmware from the vendor's website. Again, it's very easy. You just go to the support page and download the firmware, but it has its own challenges as well. For example, it might be encrypted binary that gets only decrypted through the previously deployed firmware on the device. You might not be able to find the like older versions of the firmware or things like this. And of course, it's less probable to be compromised because you are downloading from the legitimate vendor's website. So anyway, you get the firmware. Next step is to understand the firmware. This is also a challenging process because IoT devices are very diverse. We can have a smart light, with the firmware like close to a few kilobytes, and you can have a smart TV with a very huge firmware, and the structures are very different. There is no standard format. If you start looking at the firmwares, you will very soon realize that it's not easy to understand the firmware structure. There's no enough documentation. There are like different CPU architectures. You need to learn some ARM, some MIPS. There are like other architectures as well. So you need to learn the language, and also every firmware requires a different analysis process. But the good news is that there are a variety of tools and techniques out there that can help you. So we got the firmware, we understood everything, we extracted different parts of the firmware. Now, what to look for? Next step is to finding suspicious elements in the firmware. Also, some challenges about this part of the process. The structures, there are like custom structures that different vendors use, so it's not easy to understand if something has been added or not. There are like very highly customizable bootloaders, the most common ones. It's not, again, easy to understand if it's been manipulated or not. Kernel modules, especially Linux kernel that are used in most of the IoT devices, is highly customizable. Again, looking for suspicious elements, it's quite difficult to implement, and also it's very difficult to hunt for this suspicious stuff. Okay, but let's now have a look at some techniques to analyze the firmware binary. So this is the output of one of the most common and comprehensive tools out there to do binary analysis, which is binwalk. So binwalk is a tool that's been developed for a few years. It has a large collection of signatures for bootloaders, for file systems, for compressions, and also algorithms for decompression and like decoding for, of the different parts. What you can see here is the output result for a simple binwalk scan on a sample firmware binary. You can see that it could successfully detect the image header, UImage header, sorry, the compressed kernel module, and also the file system, which is a squashfs file system. You can then use binwalk to extract these parts and then investigate them. But it's not always that easy. For example, this is another one. This is the first screenshot. You see the top one is the output for another sample firmware binary. As you can see, binwalk scan cannot find anything, any known signature in this binary. But there are like other tricks that you can use with the binwalk itself, and also other techniques that can help you get some idea. Let's look at some of them for this sample binary. So let's first try running file utility on the firmware binary. As you can see here, running file utility on the firmware binary, the output shows Targa image data. So it doesn't sound right. I looked, just tried to Google it and found out that it has a very not a very specific sequence of numbers in hex format, or like it doesn't have a very specific signature at the beginning of the file. As you see here, at the beginning of the file has 01000100, which is why the file utility made this false positive. So let's try something else. binwalk is also able to give you an entropy diagram of the binary. So when you run -E option with the binwalk scan, you can see an entropy diagram with some information about the falling entropy edges and rising entropy edges. But some people might say that it's not, and what can you understand from this diagram? So it's very easy to get an initial idea about this. Entropy close to 1 means that the data or like the content is compressed or encrypted in somehow, and the entropy lower than 1 means that it's not encrypted or compressed. So we can get some idea here that up until the part that the entropy went up. It's the code for maybe bootloader, and then after that it's the compressed kernel modules and file system. But let's go further. There are also other tools that can give you a visualization of the firmware binary or any sort of binary. This is one of them, binwins.io. You can upload your file. You can also use it on your machine, if I'm not mistaken, like offline mode, to find the visualization of the binary next to the actual contents. And as you see here, the parts that are shown in red have higher entropy, and the parts that are shown in blue and green, they have lower entropy. Okay, let's go further. Let's try something else. Binwok is also capable of scanning your binary for like known signatures for functions in like different languages. For example, when you run binwok-a to scan for known function signatures on this on the same sample binary, firmware binary, you can see that it could find a lot of ARM instructions, function prologues in this binary. By looking at this, you can get some idea about the beginning of the section of the binary that has code and the end of it, and also understand the CPU architecture a little bit. Next, let's have a look at the actual content of the binary and try to see if the offsets that we have already collected from previous steps means something. So you can also look for paddings that are added by compiler to the end of each component of the firmware when the firmware was being compiled, by looking for just asterisks in a line at the output of the hexdump utility. So it can give you some idea as well. And as you can see, there are some meaningful ASCII strings here, which might be interesting. So let's next look at the strings. So if you look at the strings inside this binary, you can see lots of interesting strings. First of all, you can see when the ASCII strings have ended. So again, you can guess that this is the part that the compressed content started. And as you can see here, there are some interesting strings which might be code in comment in the code that talks about calling the module entry point, coming back from like return from entry point. That might be very useful. Also looking at other parts of the strings in other parts of the firmware binary, you can see some names for the libraries used for like different components of the firmware, and also other information, like as you can see it in the middle of this screenshot, there is a string saying not booting from soft loader. So again, it helps us to get an idea that confirms again that it's the part that has the bootloader. So going further, we can just either open the full binary in IDA or any other disassembler that you like, and try to inspect the parts that are dealing with the strings that we've seen earlier. Or also you can extract that part of the firmware binary that you guess has the bootloader code, and open that one in the disassembler. Why I gave the IDA this -p arm option, it's because this is not a normal ELF file with a standard headers that can give IDA the information to the information about the CPU architecture. So we need to tell it specifically to treat this binary as a ARM binary. So as you can see here, looking at the strings, we could exactly find the call or jump to the entry point of the kernel module. Anyway, after that, you can just extract different parts of the firmware. You can use emulators to emulate different binaries on your system, different binaries that are written for like other architectures. Like for example, in this case, we have ARM binaries, but we can just emulate them on the different architecture and try to interact with the binaries. So after this, after we have collected all the, or extracted all the different parts of the firmware, now is the time to look for suspicious stuff. As I said, it's not the easiest part, but anyway, there are some suggestions from me, and I like to hear from you guys. If you have done similar things, what do you suggest? So first of all, I think it's the easiest thing, first step is to do an antivirus scan. Then you can scan the firmware contents and different parts with the YARA rule set that you have based on, I don't know, maybe known IoT malwares or any other YARA rule that you have. Also, there are tools like Firmware that can help you scan your firmware for like vulnerable or like, yeah, some sort of vulnerable binaries or vulnerable sections. Also, you can look for unusual timestamps, like timestamps that are not matching with the release time of the firmware. If you know what firmware it is, you can look for modules that are added much later than the actual file system. You can look for invalid timestamps. Also, you can look inside like startup folders and scripts to see if something suspicious has been added to these scripts. You can look for anomalies in bootloader, like suspicious strings, suspicious code, also encrypted data inside the bootloader. So basically, sorry for speaking too fast, but let's conclude what we have seen in my talk. As you all know, today IoT devices are everywhere in our lives. They are in our homes, in our offices, in the cities, and almost everywhere. IoT devices are initially derived from embedded devices, but in embedded devices, they have like different situation, and traditionally they had like different priorities in development process based on their own like functionalities. But today, I think security has to be a priority in IoT devices. As we learned, it's not easy to obtain a firmware, it's not easy to analyze, and it's not easy to investigate the firmware, but we can just practice and learn and share knowledge. If you like to collaborate and work together, you can reach out to me on my Twitter, or you can send email to this email, and we can talk to each other. Thank you. That was it.
Thank you, Noushin. So this is like recent research, and the idea of IoT security, it's been going for like how many years? I think I would say like 5, 6, 10 years. In your opinion, and there's a question from the public, in your opinion, do you think vendors will start implementing better protection for IoT devices anytime soon? And what could be the reason to prompt them to move faster than they do right now?
So basically, I looked at, there are lots of IoT devices from lesser known vendors, but there are also very famous and well-established electronic manufacturers that develop IoT devices and smart home appliances these days. I tried to look at their websites to get firmwares from different devices, but unfortunately, some of them, they don't even have the capability in their smart home appliances to get updates, not from their website. I'm not talking about their website. I mean, in general, the device is manufactured with the firmware, and there is no way to update it after that. So I don't think vendors are still taking the security very seriously. But I guess if people talk about this more and do more research, try to improve the knowledge, the general knowledge about the security of these devices, vendors get pushed to take it more seriously.
I have a short question from my side, and then we will answer all the other questions. I've seen some others from the public during our AMA session, which will happen right at the end after our last presentation. So my question for you, Noushin, is did you research devices which were running Linux, or also devices which were running other platforms as well?
I looked at different firmwares with Linux kernel, and also I looked at some small chips for like Wi-Fi connection that are used inside like different IoT devices. Again, it's like the same story. The firmware is not easy to investigate. There are like many challenges in this process, and it doesn't matter if it has a kernel Linux or it has like other operating systems. The situation is quite similar in my experience.
Okay, thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we don't have any time left. We will answer all the other questions during the AMA. You will get to meet Noushin again shortly. Thanks a lot, Noushin. And thanks a lot for your presentation. Stay tuned for the next week webinar, where we will be presenting our online Yara training. So our online Yara training, which will be available starting from next week. The idea of building an online Yara training is that you might, for the ones who attended SAS offline, you know that we had a training for 2 days of Yara, offline Yara training. So due to pandemic, and because we want to share our knowledge to the world, we have created this online Yara training. Actually, Mr. Kostin Raju is the main ninja, the master ninja, and he recorded everything. He recorded all the sessions, and he recorded like a lot of interesting exercises. So we will be having a webinar for the launch of this online Yara training next week, and hopefully I will see you all of you there next week. And also another reason to join us for the webinar is that at the end of the webinar, one lucky winner will be selected to win a free ticket to complete the full training, and the full training is worth $1,400. So a lot of reasons to join us next week, where we will be showing some cool Yara tricks, and we will be also showing our online Yara training. It's not my wife calling in the background, no. But I would like to invite the next speakers, Mr. Maher, Mr. Ivan, and Mr. Pierre. And we will see their presentation about Cyber-mercenaries. Hello, guys.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yep. I can hear you, Ivan, yeah.
Hey, Dan.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you?
And we have Pierre. Yeah. All right, so shall we?
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
And thanks for attending this talk. So today we'll be introducing a new threat actor to which we've attributed various sets of activities, some of which you might actually be familiar with. We've released even a few private reports about them, and until recently we had been tracking them under the name Decepticons. But with the public release of this research, we decided to update the name to Death Stalker. But if you have heard us use the Decepticons name before, it's the exact same actor that we're talking about in this session. So, In this presentation, we'll introduce a threat actor. Again, introduction. It's not a deep dive into too many aspects. We'll introduce a threat actor, how it came to our attention, the tool set used, the recent updated TTPs, and we'll end up with some takeaways. So without further ado, let's get into it. So let's establish first some context. Why bother with cyber mercenaries? For many years, the industry has focused on exposing common threat actors such as state-sponsored, hacktivists, organized crime, and insider threats, while missing out on other potential threat actor types such as cyber mercenaries or hacker for hires that seem blending in the crowd as well. What makes this threat actor type interesting is the fact that they don't have consistent targeting or agenda, and they could be hired by literally anyone. They could simply fit many companies' threat model also. They get paid for silently collecting private and sensitive information that could be used in many forms, such as business and competitive intelligence, blackmailing, information brokerage, and so on. Lastly, hackers for hire is a trending business, so we expect to see more of this actor type exposed in the future. In fact, this year alone, we are hearing more about this type of threat actors than in previous years. And if you've been following the news, you could also spot other threat actors such as Dark Basin and Red Curl, both presumably hacker for hire groups. So we thought it's time to publicly expose yet another threat actor that follows the same path, and which we named Death Stalker. So briefly, who is Death Stalker? It's likely a hacker for hire threat actor, a group who aims at sensitive information and private information, while not using much of advanced tool set, I would say. This actor group use more stealthy methods to stay in the shadows. For example, they use LNK-based wrappers to execute a multi-stage chain that relies mostly on interpreted languages-based malware, such as PowerShell, JavaScript, and Python. Also, they usually don't directly interact with the C2 address, but tries to fetch it from an intermediary that drop resolvers or web services. And on occasions, they do separate main C2 communication from a secondary C2 server that is used to fetch more toolset and or exfiltrate victim data. As for the actions and objectives, we see this actor group commonly collecting the same type of victim data, such as private documents, browser cookies, interestingly, email and software credentials, and so on. So this actor group doesn't have consistent targeting in terms of verticals or regions. While their main focus seemed to be SMBs and law firms and financial institutions, we also saw them in unusual sectors, such as diplomatic entities, which was interesting to us. And before we continue, it's time for our first poll. So have you or your company considered cyber mercenaries in your threat model? We'll leave it for a poll. We'll leave the poll for a minute, and then we'll continue. Okay, so how did it all start? So to us, it all started in late 2018 when two researchers were discussing an interesting LNK dropper that was named PowerSync, and it used an enticing decoys and goes into a chained execution flow and connects to a set of web services to fetch C2 IP address. And YouTube was the most common web service by then. So the analysis back then indicated a possible connection to another malware family named GReAT, an OS X and Windows capable malware. When we followed further in the rabbit hole, it took us back to 2013. And where GReAT was first mentioned. So we started documenting our findings and analyzing many relevant samples. We started seeing some similarities and evolution of TTPs. More on the similarities in a few more slides. But then during 2019, and while working on some pivots, we came across EvenNum. Really, it's one of the lucky times where you make a random pivot and get something fruitful. So we noticed that EvenNum first mentioned in 2018 by some researchers, then it was named by Palo Alto, then detailed by ESET. had some nice similarities. For example, the web services, the DDRs, and the TTPs. So we kept documenting and digging through the rabbit hole and to discover and learn more and many aspects of the malware families. Yet we are still learning. So Deathstalker keeps updating and upgrading the tool sets and TTPs. Even we have seen the last update was in probably June, May, and onwards. So now we have all three families, malware families, having some links, which we assess with medium confidence, belong to one threat actor, which we named Deathstalker. Let's now jump into more details on the tool that triggered this whole thingy, PowerSync. But before I leave it to Ivan to walk us through it, could I ask you to participate in our second poll? Our second poll is, which threat actor type are you mostly concerned about? Again, we'll leave it for a minute and then we'll move on.
Okay, thank you, Maher. I'll take it from here. So, as you mentioned, the Deathstalker first came to our attention around 2018 when a toolchain called PowerSync was discussed in an online blog. So I would like to have a quick overview of how this infection chain works. It starts with a malicious archive that is sent to victims in convincing spear phishing emails. So the archive contains a shortcut file, which is named like a document, but instead it points to cmd.exe with a command line that's actually a PowerShell script. The script itself is very simple. It opens the LNK file and locates a VBS script located right at the end, and then it drops that VBS somewhere and executes it. And that VBS also obtains files from the LNK's overlay data. The first one of those is a decoy document, which is displayed to the user to perfect the illusion of having clicked on whatever was advertised. And the other one is a PowerShell script that we consider to be actually the first part of the PowerSync implant. PowerSync is written in PowerShell, but it also embeds a C#.NET assembly. And its role is to extract the 4 last remaining pieces of this Jenga tower of a shortcut file that I'm going to address in turn. So the first part is an arbitrary data blob that is referred to as DLL in the code, only it's not really a DLL. Well, skipping over some trivial details, let's just say that PowerSync just locates a URL at a fixed offset inside of it, and the file structure really doesn't matter at all. So that URL that it is obtained here just points to content hosted on well-known services. Basically, the attackers here have used any kind of third-party service where they could store a little bit of text for free. That involves social media platforms, blogging platforms, forums, comments on content hosting services, etc. The list is displayed here, but in all likelihood, it's incomplete. So this allows the PowerSync stage 1 to make web requests that look very innocuous because they are related to legitimate and trusted online services. So the recovered messages look like this one, like my keyboard doesn't work, then some random string, and then yo bro I sing, and the base64 string. So this is where the name PowerSync comes from, by the way. So you can find a lot of those with simple Google queries. But the idea here is that the first string obtained at this point contains cryptographic material used to decrypt the stage 2, which had been left masked to here. Other tasks performed by the stage 1 involve setting up persistence, running that startup VBS script whenever the computer starts. In some instances, the startup script and the loader script are exactly the same as well, but in some cases, they contain minor differences. And stage 1 also does a first round of AV detection, and they will take various actions depending on what is found on the victim machine. All the samples that we discovered over time display different behaviors, which leads us to think that AV reactions are tested meticulously before each campaign by the attackers. As for PowerSync stage 2, then it does yet another round of VM or AV and analysis tool detection. Beyond this, it only offers a very limited set of features, which are sending periodic screenshot captures to the C2 and also executing arbitrary PowerShell scripts to, from the C2. One interesting tidbit is about the infrastructure. Some of the C2 servers used by PowerSync displayed this following HTTPS certificate for some, and this name IT department is really reminiscent of the certificates that Sophosy used for their chopstick infrastructure. And it's unclear to us what the attacker were trying to accomplish by mimicking Sophosy. It could be a weak attempt at misdirecting attribution efforts towards a well-known APT group, but here I think the shoe just doesn't fit. So now I'm just going to leave Maher to talk about the similarities between those groups and the various malware families that they use.
Thanks, Ivan. So while investigating this threat actor and its PowerShell-based malware, we noticed that several researchers publicly analyzed different related samples and attributed them to different threat actors based on C2 attributes, malware complexity, victimology, and so on. So, when all the samples are and intrusions are put into perspective, then the view changed significantly. But by analyzing the samples, we noticed a number of interesting similarities between PowerSync, the JavaScript-based EvilNum, and GReAT malware families. So all three malware families share the same intrusions flow and actions on objectives, but also interestingly, they share something else. So while we can talk for hours on across the cyber kill chain phases and the similarities all the way from weaponization to actions on objectives, we'll just focus for now on a very interesting piece, that is how all three families fetch the C2 address from their respective DDR. So notice all three malware families try to fetch a long integer using regular expressions from a DDR and divided by a constant to calculate the C2 IP address. So while the pattern to get the integer remained consistent over long periods, the constants and the respective function name did change between campaigns, possibly to keep evading analysis. Even though these malware families are written in different languages even, we feel that this pattern is unique enough to draw the first connection between them. We were additionally able to identify some overlaps in function names between them, and for additional details on that, I do recommend you have a look at our secure list post, which we released a few days ago on this topic. Finally, all these were interesting enough and lasted for several years and are still in active development. We have recently uncovered a fourth malware family that is similarly interesting. I'll leave you with my colleague Pierre to tell us more about the newest malware family. Thank you. Pierre?
Yes, Maher. So hi everyone, I just wanted to very quickly introduce a new Deathstalker exploitation pack. So if you can switch, yeah, perfect. So indeed, GReAT, EvilNum, and PowerSync were apparently not in-house for Deathstalker. We have been tracking parts of another delivery chain since May 2020, and we could not get the whole picture due to missing pieces. Yet we attributed these parts to Deathstalker because of common deployment tactics, identical code parts, and cooperation with third parties that allowed us to determine that this deployment chain has been at least partly developed on computers that also hosted PowerSync development. On July the 18th, an IP in Argentina submitted a document on VT. We spotted it quickly and found all the missing pieces in it. So here you have an overview of this new delivery chain, which, as PowerSync, is based on a monolithic file and deploys a PowerShell implant that we call PowerPepper. It is based on the mail-attached Word document. Using VBA macros, the Word document decrypts and extracts another subdocument. This last subdocument contains two Windows compiled EBB files, or CHM, named as pictures and that are extracted with Windows HH utility. The CHM contains the startup link, which is very similar to the one that is dropped from the PowerSync chain, a VBS loader script, and a picture. The VBS loader script will ultimately extract a PowerPepper from the picture thanks to a steganography. And if we can switch, yeah, perfect. The PowerPepper implant itself is interesting because it notably leverages DNS over HTTPS as C2 channel. If that does not work, then PowerPepper will attempt fallback techniques to reach its C2, like, for instance, using regular DNS. We can see there that both commands request to C2 and data exfiltration are embedded in DNS requests, which are respectively of TXT or A type. And apart from that, the implant is a standard remote execution tool that will leverage antivirus evasion techniques and execute remotely sent PowerShell commands. So I would please now ask you to contribute this poll. What do you think, DNS over HTTPS or TLS? bring to cybersecurity. We will discuss this later, and while you answer the poll, I'll give the talk back to Ivan that will conclude on the threat actor.
Yeah, thank you, Pierre. So we introduced this threat actor that is called a Deathstalker, who targets mainly law offices, wealth consultancy firms, companies in the fintech sector, etc. So we think it's been around for a long time, at least since 2012, probably. It's interesting because it goes after business intelligence all over the world. We thought it was important to release this research because of the targets, and SMBs are usually considered soft targets because they tend to stay under the radar of state-sponsored threat actors, and as such, they don't really feel like they need to invest in cybersecurity as much as, say, defense contractors. But the thing is, businesses do have competitors as well, some of whom may resort to underhanded tactics. So companies, no matter how insignificant they think they are never really safe from hacking attempts. And we felt that Deathstalker, their toolset was a perfect example of what a small group of skilled and motivated individuals could come up with. And so if it's true that SMBs don't have to worry about 0 days and rootkits, we still believe that they should take a very close look at those methodologies, because this is the kind of tools and techniques that are likely to be hit with. So as for protecting against such attacks, our main recommendation would be to disable interpreters for scripting languages whenever possible. So PowerShell.exe or cscript.exe. If you can, just disable them from user machine. If they don't need it, then probably they shouldn't be there. And doing this simple measure would actually stop all the tool chains that we discussed dead in their tracks. Otherwise, at least make sure that you do have some PowerShell logging. And you should pay close attention to all the events where such processes are created. And finally, the 3 tool chains that we described in this presentation were based on LNK files, and we recommend that since they are a very apparently efficient vector of intrusion, we recommend that they are included in future awareness trainings. So with that, thank you very much for attending this session. I don't know if you have time for questions, but first we can maybe have a quick look at the poll results. So have you considered cyber-mercenaries in your threat model? So about the audience is divided, about half of you say that you do. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm actually curious about the percentage of attendees that do work for SMBs. Because if you're all working for defense contractors, then it kind of skews the polls, but that's still interesting nonetheless. How about the next one? So the threat actor type that you or your company are mostly concerned about are APTs and then cyber criminals. Okay. So yeah, I think it makes sense. Well, again, depending on which sector you're working from. Probably, I'd guess that cyber criminals, organized crime, especially when it comes to ransomware, might need to be a little higher, but otherwise, no surprise from the results. Also interesting to see that insiders are 16%. I didn't expect this one. And finally, what do you think DOH/DOT bring to cybersecurity? So, troubles, yeah, that's the most popular answer is troubles. So yeah, some of you appear to think that it brings better user privacy and also more TLS traffic to inspect. Yeah. So yeah, thanks a lot for taking time to reply to those that are always very interesting. Mr. Dan, do we have time for some questions, or do we wait for the AMA?
Mr. Ivan, unfortunately, we don't have time now. But we see all the questions from all our participants, and we will be meeting with you guys later during our AMA session, and we'll be chatting there.
All right, see you later then.
See you later. See you later. Thanks a lot for your presentation. See you guys. And without any further delay, let's move to our next speaker. Again, stay with us, stay tuned. We are unveiling some new, more APT actors or APT campaigns. And speaking of, we are gonna meet with Mr. Giampaolo and he's going to talk about not so transparent tribe.
Hello, Dan.
Hello.
Hello to everyone.
Buongiorno. How are you, man?
I'm fine. I can say I'm fine.
I know you said you caught a little bit of cold
Yeah, I got cold
today.
and my throat is hurting.
I hope you're gonna get.
You can hear my sexy voice today.
Well, we appreciate your efforts for staying presenting today. Thanks a lot. Gianpaolo did not get COVID. Come on, it's just a cold, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
And yes, you have an amazing background. Yeah, try to share your screen as well.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect.
Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Hello again to everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Transparent Tribe APT group. And I'm going to present a different discovery that we made during the first part of the current year. Let's start with a few words about Transparent Tribe. This is an APT group discovered in 2016 by Proofpoint. And during the last 4 years, they never stopped the activities. This group is very active, and they usually target government, embassies, or military organization. And usually they focus on Central Asia and Southeast Asia, but mainly their favorite targets are Indian and Afghanistan users. They use many different tools. Sometimes they use tools written in Python like GReAT, but they use also a lot of .NET tools. For example, the main rat is Crimson Rat and is developed in .NET. Their typical infection scheme is quite simple. They send a spear phishing email to the target, and the email contains an attachment, a document, or contains a URL that points to a malicious document. The document contains a macro, and the macro is developed to drop another payload, which usually is the Crimson Rat thin client component. As I say, Crimson Rat is the main tool. Is a really powerful tool for espionage activities. It can be used to perform a lot of different actions, like, for example, manage the remote file system, capture screenshot, record video from the camera, perform audio surveillance, steal password. And we try to track this malware in our day-by-day activities. And some months ago, we found another interesting sample, which was detected by our product as Crimson Rat. But with a deeper investigation, we realized that it was something different. It was a server-side implant created to manage the other Crimson Rat client components. The file is an executable file, a .NET program. It doesn't work alone. It needs to be executed in a specific environment with specific files in specific locations. And I was able to create a working environment by analyzing the sample. This is, for example, the main panel. As you can see, there is a list of infected machines with some information about them. On the top, there is a toolbar which can be used by the attacker to manage the server or perform some actions on the selected bot. The server contains also an embedded configuration with some static values that cannot be modified by the attacker. And also it's interesting to highlight that the server doesn't include any builder, so it's not able to build the other component. And for this reason, I suppose there is also another file which today is not available, which is the real builder and is used to create all files, the server and the client component. This is one of the most important interface is the bot panel, which can be used to manage the remote machine. The bot panel is an interface with 12 tabs. And this is the first tab is named update module, and it can be used by the attacker to modify the client configuration or to upload and execute the other component. The Crimson RAT is like a framework. It is composed by 7 different components. The think line is a tiny version of the RAT, and it can be used to recognize the victim. For example, it provides a limited number of features, like for example, it can be used to collect information on infected machine, collect screenshot, manage the remote file system, download, upload files, or manage the remote process. The main client is the real full feature RAT. It can be used to perform other actions, like for example, capture webcam images, or perform audio surveillance with a microphone, and is important because it can be used to upload and execute the other Crimson RAT components. Then we have the USB driver, which basically is a tool to steal files with specific extensions from the removable drives. And the USB worm is quite similar to the USB drive, but it can be used also to spread across the system by infecting the removable drives. And the USB worm can be used also to download the thin client component. The password logger is a password stealer. It's still the password from the browsers. And the keylogger is, is a keylogger. It just records the keystroke and save everything in a local file. It's interesting that the server was configured to prevent installation of some components on a system protected by a specific security vendor. For example, they prevent installation of USB driver and pass logger components on system protected by Kaspersky. And they prevent also the installation of password logger on system protected by HAZET. The USB worm deserves a specific slide because this is a component was extensive, has been speculated since at least 2016, when Proofpoint mentioned a command, the USBWRM command, and they speculate that probably was related to something with worm capabilities. But as far as we know, this component has never been described in public. Now we know that this component is similar to the USB driver because it can be used to steal the files, but it can be used also to spread across the system by copying itself on the removable drives. And it can be used to download and execute the thin client component on systems which are not infected by Crimson RAT. The infection scheme, the trick used by this worm to infect the removable drives is quite simple, but also really effective on systems which are using the default Windows settings. And I mean system where the hidden files and the known file extension are not visible by the user. Basically, the worm starts to enumerate whole directories inside the removable drive. And then for each directory, it will create a copy of itself with the same directory name. And it will set the directory attribute. It enables the hidden attribute in the directory. So basically, when the user will try to open a directory, it will execute the worm. Moreover, the worm, before starting the main activity, it will try to start another explorer process, and it provides the directory name as argument. So basically, the user will see the directory content because the malware starts another explorer window, and the user will not be able to understand that there is something wrong. We try to collect some statistics about all Crimson client component, and we found more than 1,000 victims across 33 countries. Most of the detection were generated by the USB worm, and we try to find the victims. We exclude the USB worm detection. We can see that the transparent tribe was trying to focus to target 2 specific countries, India and Afghanistan. And we can see that they focused their activities on Afghanistan and India during the last part of 2019, Then during the first part of the current year, they focused their attack on India. This is related to another finding, is related to an Android implant. Let's start. We found this sample because we were investigating on another campaign. We found this document, which is not malicious by itself. It doesn't contain any malicious code, but the document contains two URLs. The URLs point to two malicious documents, which are used to distribute the Crimson thin client, and sharingmymedia.com was registered in January and was pointing to that IP address, which is related to a sharing ghosting server. Using our Kaspersky threat intelligence portal, we found also another domain, which is quite similar to the previous one, sharemydrives.com. This domain was registered 7 days before the previous one. It was pointing to the same server, and it was registered with the same whois information. And using our portal, we found also another interesting file, daisyporn.apk. Daisyporn is a dropper. It tried to appear as secret player, a player just to play porn content, and it embeds six different APK files. And it used this function to install the embedded APK files. So this function basically tried to find an application which is not installed on the system. When it found something that is not installed, it select that application as target and install one of the embedded APK according the application, the function result. For example, if Snapchat is not installed on the system, it will try to install snap.apk. The embedded packages are modified version of another open source RAT, which is named Yamout RAT. This is an open source project which can be downloaded from GitHub, and by default it can be used to manage the camera. It contains a file manager. It can be used to track the device position, and basically Transparent Tribe modified the code, and they had new commands, and also they improve existing command. They modify also the way used by the malware to retrieve the C2 address. In the public version, the C2 address is embedded in the code in clear text. In the Transparent Tribe version, there is another URL encoded with base 64, and the URL point to a remote text file which contains the real C2 address. And they modify also the URL scheme used by the malware. They had two values, the MAC and the battery. The MAC is like the email number. After 1 month, we defined another application. It was discovered by my colleague Sasha. And they found an application which was quite similar to Daisyporn, but it was named as GReAT. And this is a COVID-19 tracking app developed by the government of India. And this application is similar to Daisyporn. It contains the same amount of APK files with the same file names. It uses the same function to select the APK that will be installed on the system. And the embedded APK are modified version of Yamout RAT configured to connect to the same URL. There are very low modification, like for example, GReAT can use a public exploit to get more privileges. And the same exploit was available also on Daisyporn application, but it wasn't used. It was embedded, but not used by the malware. The last finding is related to another malware, HolyWater. HolyWater was found in February by Cisco Talos, and is another malware which can be used to execute arbitrary commands, exfiltrate files, or upload other files. And they found two different variants. The first variant was distributed using a document which is quite similar to the one used by Transparent Tribe to distribute Crimson Rat. And for this reason, they attribute the malware to Transparent Tribe. They found also another variant, which is named variant 0, which was dropped by another executable file, but they have no idea how it was arrived on the infected machine. Today, we can add a small piece to this puzzle because using our Kaspersky Threat Intelligence portal, we know that sharedmydrives.com was hosting daisyporn.apk, but it was hosting also another file, wifeexchange.exe. This is another dropper which tries to appear as a media file, and basically it dropped and start other two files, movie.mp4, which is a small porn clip, and frame.exe, which is the same file mentioned by Cisco Talos in their blog post. So basically today we have another evidence to attribute oblique rat to a Transparent Tribe, and we have some information to understand the infection chain used by attacker. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any question, please ask it. I'll try to answer.
Okay, so thanks a lot. There are some questions there are two questions. I think we have time to answer those ones, and then later we will be joining with you, and then we can further discuss what you talked about. Mr. Dave Aitel is asking if this is a worm or a C2 over USB, and his second question is, does it go beyond the initial infection?
I think he's talking about the USB worm.
Yeah, he asked those questions when you showed the slides with the hidden folder, and when it changed the folder into an executable, and then when the user is restricted to clicking that file.
But basically, let me try to describe it again. Basically, the worm by default creates itself on the removable drive. So it tried to create many different copies of itself that will be, and the copies will be executed by the user when it will try to access the directories. Then when the worm starts on another machine, it checks if the machine is already compromised by the Crimson Rat component. If the system is clean, it uses a specific command to download the thin client component from the remote C2. Otherwise, it executes on the system.
Okay. So thanks a lot for this clarification. Again, we will be meeting you shortly, and then we can further discuss this technique if it's interesting for our participants. And we can we can discuss about this one more in depth. Also, just a brief mention that somebody mentioned that there might be like a screenshot for the C and C panel for the Android malware that you just described. So we will discuss some further things with you during our AMA session. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your presentation, and see you in a bit.
See you later.
I think it's time to move to another presentation by our trio from France, our French colleagues, my good friends, Mr. Ivan, Mr. Pierre, and Mr. Felix. Welcome back, Ivan and Pierre. Hello, Felix.
Hello, hello.
How are you? Bonjour.
Oh, fine, and you? Good weather in Paris. Everything is fine.
I'm happy to hear that. So we can see your slide, and you're going to talk about HolyWater.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks, Mr. Dan, for this little introduction, and let's go for this new presentation. So Ivan, Pierre, and myself will cover in this little presentation a cyber-espionage campaign that we codenamed HolyWater, and we have published it on SecureList a few months ago. It was in March this year. but we will also present different new findings about it. So unlike every good stories, everything began by a nice discovery, and this time it was not like some spear phishing stuff or any malicious implant, but just a simple, very teeny and effective watering hole implemented on a religious minority website. And this discovery was made by like our own tool that we named Nightcrawler this last December. It was on the 4th, if I remember well. And Nightcrawler is like a software dedicated to find watering holes automatically that I've developed. It was like 5 years ago during my spare time. And this tool crawls today 50,000 websites just by looking for malicious redirection or any like teeny change on them that can be malicious, and it can bust like mage card stuff or APT stuff or anything, even malicious ads. And if you want to know how it works, I've done a presentation on it during like the BotConf 2017, and you can see this conference by scanning the small QR code on the right of like this slide. So, okay, the auto promo was done, so I'm go back to our discovery, and yes, it was not the first time that we saw this community targeted by watering holes, but like most of the time, it was just with known frameworks such as like BIF. But this new discovery was slightly different from the others because the watering hole were done with like a very custom script and by changing a legitimate script on the victim website. And there's a modification lead to the loading of like other scripts during the browsing session, themselves also hosted on a legitimate server owned by this community. So by visiting the compromised websites, the visitors were silently redirected to another server, which is like the small GET request that you can see on the second pictures. And it was to like a dynamic DNS. And it's by like, for example, by seeing that redirection to this dynamic DNS that Nightcrawler issued an alert. And in details, as you can see on this new slide, the whitelisting server doesn't answer just any URL or something to load, but just a very small T, I think it was for true. If the target who is visiting the website, it's the one expected by the attacker. And if so, the script loads another script. And this last stage was aimed to trick the user to install a malware by showing like a warning model associated to a Flash player update. Note that you have also a Mac part if the user has like Mac OS 6 exploiting system, but the issue is that we haven't find the script regarding maybe it was like a 0-day or some like browser exploitation. But in our part, in the Windows part, it's worth of nothing that the final malware to download it was not hosted like on the attacker website or server, but directly available on the GitHub repository. And this allowing us to investigate on the operation history and get more implants. But well, I'm stopping here just because my friend Ivan will cover that part later. And so what were the website compromised during this operation? And it's quite interesting because during the first day of the investigation, we found like different websites compromised by our attacker. And after like small analysis, we found that all of those websites were resolving the Cloudflare CDN. And after that, we saw that all of them were in fact on the same IP address behind Cloudflare. So by that, the attacker just had to compromise like one server to get a strike on many websites associated to this religious minority. So now I'm gonna give the mic to Ivan to show the template. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. So The malicious files being staged on GitHub for this campaign, we were able to obtain very unique insight into the campaign's history, as well as a complete chronology of the malware used by this group, which was pretty nice. Overall, 4 malware families had been hosted in this repository between May 2019 and February 2020. And following our investigation, we got in touch with GitHub to get this repository taken down and at the same time disabling the whole campaign, at least for a time. The first family that we discovered is an installer package, which is a dropper written in C. It bundles a legitimate Adobe Flash setup with a Stitch backdoor. And this utility drops and executes both PE files and also takes care of persistence. It was mostly used at the beginning of the campaign, but was gradually phased out. Stitch is a multi-platform Python backdoor, which offers all the features that you'd expect, like key logging, script job capture, arbitrary script execution, etc. And it establishes a communication channel with the C2 server encrypted with the AES algorithm. And as the attackers shed away the installer packages, they merge all the features into Stitch by adding a wrapper Python script around the project. So what the wrapper did was downloading and executing a legitimate Adobe Flash setup from a remote server, setting up persistence, and checking for malware updates and performing automatic upgrades on startup as well. Another tool that we discovered was in this repository comes from the earliest toolset used by this threat actor. It relies on an NSIS installer which deploys this validator and of course also launches a legitimate Flash setup. Upon execution, the validator sends victim information to the C2 such as host name, IP address, etc. And then the C2 may provide additional DLL files to load for additional features, but we were not able to get a hold of these during the investigation. It's, however, very interesting to observe that this sample appears to originate from a very old code base. The OS detection routine contains explicit references to Windows 95 and Windows 98. The user agent is associated with Internet Explorer 8, and the file's rich header indicates that it could have been compiled on Visual Studio 98, which is pretty old if you ask me. So we can only speculate as to where the group obtained this tool that they used initially before switching to open source or new implants. But this could be indicative of being an operation from a very old threat actor, or maybe a threat actor that received its initial tooling from a pre-existing group before moving on with tools of its own. And with this, the last malware family that we discovered is going to be presented by Pierre.
Yes, hello again to everyone. So we'll talk about another family of malwares that we call Godlike 12. We first discovered it by browsing HolyWater GitHub in early 2020. Godlike 12 is a Golang backdoor with remote command capabilities that relies on the Google Drive storage as a C2 channel and leverages open source Go code like Go Drive to access Google Drive storage or Golang code blobs to encrypt data. The implant download, deployment, and persistent setup are done by a fake flash update drop tool, which is developed in Golang as well. Adobe or Intel names are used all along to poorly masquerade the implant and its downloader as legitimate files. We actually found the Godlike 12 naming from an attempt to get information on the Google Drive C2 storage. Google APIs rely on an OAuth-based authentication flow so that developers exposed applications that use Google can get authorization from users. This flow presents a Google authentication form in the browser by default and displays some information on the application that requests your authorization. So we just ran an authentication flow with the implant embedded Google API client ID from a dummy application, and we got served with some details like the name that operators gave to the application that is associated with the implant. So Godlike 12 uses a Google Drive storage as a C2 channel. At start, the implant will gather compromised host details like host name and so on, and send that all in an encrypted file to the Google Drive storage. They use a very, very bad hard-coded key to encrypt files with triple DES. The file that is uploaded is named with an ID, which is a hash of the victim MAC address of the first adapter. Regularly then, Godlike 12 looks for files with the same ID, but that ends with another suffix on the Google Drive storage. If one is found, it is downloaded, decrypted, and content is executed in Windows cmd.exe. Then the results are sent back to the C2 with another file upload. Leveraging this knowledge from analysis, we managed to regularly list the contents of the implant Google Drive storage. This was actually full of targeted host information files, including revision of the files, some data dated back to the second half of 2019. Unfortunately, we did not find lots of commands in C2 storage because command files are deleted just after command execution. Nonetheless, this allowed to identify further possible implant's name and HolyWater's activity clues on compromised hosts. This precious data allowed us to alert targets, which enabled incident response and ultimately allowed us to identify more tools. So those more tools are actually T-bots. On the 9th of April, and just after our alert to the targets, an Indian IP address submitted a previously unknown godlike 12 samples along with 2 other unknown implants on VT. Those implants were actually packed Python ones that were based on open source Python rats, which use Telegram bots as C2 channels. The same day submission from the same submitter ID on VT was already a hint, but we could link these implants to HolyWater with higher confidence because these implants were also faking Adobe names because they were named like files that were referenced in godlike 12 C2 commands, and because Telegram bots that are leveraged as C2 channels were named like previously godlike 12 compromised computers. A target later confirmed that it submitted those files following our alerts. The implants we found, while based on different open source Python rats, offer approximately the same capabilities: remote execution, file upload and download, keylogging, microphone monitoring, and screenshotting. But most of all, they leverage a Telegram bot as a C2 channel. A Telegram bot is actually a gateway between the Telegram messaging app and HTTP API endpoints. Once a bot is created using a token-based authentication, any app that holds the token will be able to process messages that are sent from any user to the bot, either in group chats or one-to-one chats. HolyWater embedded the bot token in an implant and then could just send messages to the bot in Telegram, which would actually be sending a command to the implant. As the implants directly embedded Telegram bot token, we could retrieve bot chat history. Unfortunately, messages and commands that are sent to the bot are not kept for long, 24-hour maximum, and we can only retrieve the last 100 messages in any way. But this still allowed us to retrieve interesting information, like for instance, a server that HolyWater leveraged to deploy further tools. We also tried to reach Telegram and ask for their cooperation in identifying more malicious bots from the same actor, but drastic privacy policy and regulation on personal data probably did not allow them to reply to us. To wrap it all up, some high-level insights on HolyWater. First, the threat actor is shifting a lot and often from C++ developed implants and NSIS installers to Go, passing by Python open source, JavaScript, Google Drive, and Telegram bots. The tactics and code are, however, not sophisticated. This indicates a possibly young and small team. Then HolyWater did not even try to escape detection or analysis. Some files are more than 20 megabytes, are based on open source rats, and use hard-coded tokens and encryption keys. And most of all, HolyWater is highly focused. We could only detect their tools and activities against an ethnic minority in Asia and nowhere else. Due to this insistent and focused targeting, we are pretty sure that this threat actor will continue to develop its capabilities and aim for the same victim group again in the next months and years. I now give the talk back to Ivan for some advice on protecting against HolyWater.
Yes, thank you, Pierre. I think it's important to take a minute to talk about how to prevent those attacks maybe. So the first avenue would be to, well, avoid having watering holes in the first place. So to do this, webmasters need to make sure that CMS they use and also servers that host their websites are kept up to date. This includes plugins as well. And also that they need to make sure that they're using robust authentication methods for their servers, like SSH keys and not weak passwords. Apart from this, we could recommend having some kind of integrity checking for the website files if possible. Tripwire, I think, provides a solution for this. Otherwise, on the user side, disabling JavaScript, or at least enabling it only for trusted domains, goes a long way, I think. Of course, browsers and plugins inside of the browsers need to be kept up to date as well, as much as possible. When it comes to user machines, application whitelisting could help. Windows has a solution they call App Locker that can make sure that users cannot double click on executables that they shouldn't be clicking on. Apart from this, we of course recommend having some strong endpoint protection and making sure that some kind of solution somewhere is monitoring the auto runs on a machine, especially to detect new programs that could be run at startup. Finally, on the organization level, we recommend all the state-of-the-art security measures, like having generic administrator accounts on organization computers, having some sort of DNS and HTTP proxy that does some allow or deny listing, as well as DNS logging if possible, and generally making sure that permission and authentication on the user exposed shares are as strong as possible. And finally, our last piece of advice would be to make sure that network defenses depth is applied whenever possible. And I think this concludes our presentation on HolyWater. Well, we hope you found it interesting, and we'll be happy to take some questions if there's enough time. And I'll give it back to Mr. Dan.
Hello, thanks a lot for your presentation. We have time for 2 questions. So the first question comes from Luis Alfonso Diaz, who says, can GIFs be used as bots to as a C2 communication channel? Have you seen such kind of behavior?
Well,
like GIF images.
If we're talking about the Telegram bots,
yeah,
the code did not implement any image-based command receiving. This was more like a classical text command receiving. And I guess it's pretty much easier for the operators to just send a quick command over the Telegram to remote control the implants.
So with GIFs, they could try to like post them on public forums, maybe sometimes, so they can just like do steganography, like just try to hide instead of like just pasting their cryptic messages, which
I mean, theoretically it's possible, but this is just not something they've been doing.
Okay, well, we'll see. Time will tell.
Yeah.
We have another question from Anna. How common do you think hacker for hire groups are now? And is it likely there are gonna be more of them in the future?
Okay, so I'm guessing this is a question for the stalker talk, right?
Well, not so much. Do you think like those kind of groups can also implement or can be like separated and can implement the techniques that you mentioned?
Well, I'm not sure whether HolyWater is a hacking for hire group at all. I don't think we have any information that would either confirm or deny this hypothesis. But in general, I think this, maybe not a trend, but this appearance of some cyber mercenary groups, I think they're only going to become more widespread in the future because, well, offensive security tools are more and more prevalent. They are easy to obtain. And I think it's quite cheap and cost efficient to just set up some form of mercenary outfit. I mean, all you need to do is get a few employees, clients, and then you're good to go, I guess. Of course, you need to have shady enough business dealings, but that's not an issue for some people. So I think in the future, we're going to see more and more of them. Also because probably SMBs are going to be looking closer and closer at what's going on in their networks, and probably existing threat actors that nobody knows about currently are going to emerge just because we're going to find them out.
Okay, thanks. So we'll discuss further about these topics during our AMA session. And I would like to thank you guys for presenting this cool new research. And we'll be meeting with you shortly after our last presentation. So thanks a lot to my French colleagues. I would like to mention that just like last time, we will have a survey at the end and you will be given an opportunity to click on a link once the event is done. And please, if you can give us your feedback regarding this event, it would help us a lot improve our events and also better understand what you want to see more in the future. So it's a way for us to understand your thoughts and to understand your views and to help us improve our events. So after our AMA session, there's going to be a link, and if you have time, it won't take long, less than 5 minutes. Please fill it in. And without any delay, I would like to invite Mr. Santi. Hello.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, man? Buenos
Really
dias.
good. Buenos dias.
Yeah. You are our last speaker for today.
Yeah,
but
correct.
You will be talking about something which is quite interesting for me, at least, because this is something that I used to research a bit, but you know way more than I know. And you'll be talking about you'll be talking about some open source intelligence during COVID-19 pandemic, and you'll be talking about Twitter open source intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. We're going to shape. Let me share my screen first.
Oh, we can see it. Yeah, we can see PowerPoint.
You can see it.
All good.
So we're going to connect the presentations from my colleagues that were talking about how IPT actors were using, for example, Telegram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and any other type of social media to, for example, control the command and control servers, to set up, for example, configurations or storage boxes, things like that. So in this case, we're going to use Twitter for open source intelligence, and we're going to focus mainly on coronavirus. So I imagine that you are using open source intelligence, but if you're not, it's like being blind, because information does not have to be secret to be valuable. And this is a quote from the CIA. Of course, CIA stands for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. And you have many sources for getting information or actually getting intelligence from. You can use Twitter, you can use Basebin. I know a lot of you are already scraping content from Basebin. Facebook, Instagram, maybe Bitcoin's blockchain, things like that. And for us as security professionals, social media is not only a way to connect. We use it to share indicators of compromise. We use it to share Suricata, Snort rules, Sigma rules. We use it to share knowledge. So it's not just about posting funny memes or cat pictures. We use it for way more than that. For this presentation, the objective is to get indicators of compromise from Twitter. But before starting to, even think about doing that, I would suggest thinking in a methodology. And for that, we can use what is called the intelligence cycle. So we can use different stages to differentiate the process. We can start with the planning, thinking about what questions are we trying to answer, then collection of the samples, then processing, so doing something with those samples or those IOCs, then analysis, and then dissemination. So this entire circle will allow us to think of this process in a way that can be replicated by other security professionals, and that for me is the most important aspect of this. I don't know if you have read a blog post written by the Dutch OSINT guy. It's really good, because it talks about that open source intelligence is not just a methodology, it's not just using scripts or tools, it's a way of thinking. And we are researchers, so our work, every research that we do should be able to be replicated by other researchers. For example, when you see a report that has all these nice descriptions, so everything is perfect, but you don't have the IOCs, how do you feel? Like cheated, because you see, like, yeah, I want to test what you told me, if it's true or not. So if we are going to use Twitter to get indicators of compromise. And first, why even use Twitter? Well, let me tell you that every day there are 330 million users in the platform, and these users produce 500 million tweets a day. So if we want to get some kind of scraping script to get all those tweets and to store them somewhere, we either need to use the API, and the API has some limitations. For example, you can only get the last 3,000 tweets of an account or a keyword. And also Twitter provides 3 different plans for the API. You have the free version, then the enterprise, and then the premium. But since we are poor and cheap, we're going to go in a different way, and we're going to use another tool that I will talk about later. But before that, we need to define the keywords that we're going to use to find content related to coronavirus, the usernames that we think are going to post indicators of compromise, URLs, regular expressions, anything that will help us build the collector. So without even turning on the computer, you can do this with a pen and a paper. You should be familiar with the advanced, and I say advanced between double quotes, with advanced operators or modifiers that Twitter provides for doing searches. So you might already know about and, or, not, double quotes, of course, hashtags, but how about using since or until, or filtering tweets that contain links, that contain images, that come from a verified account, that contain, for example, certain keyword or URL. So we can do all of that to narrow down our search and to filter all that noise. Remember, 500 million tweets each day. So, but if we are talking about coronavirus, which dates should we search for? And more importantly, which keywords? So for that, let's of course use open source intelligence. And this is the official global timeline that was published by the World Health Organization, in which they state that, well, officially, if you want to call it, the pandemic began on December 31st, 2019, and the lockdown, that period of time when we all entered our houses and never left again, began on March 11, almost pretty much the same date worldwide. So we can take 2 time periods, from beginning of this year, 2020, until March 11, and from March 11 until today. Why doing this separation? Because we want to compare if there have been more indicators of compromise in the first period, in the second period, if there have been more threats regarding coronavirus, and we want to get some type of intelligence. We want to know what's actually happening regarding threats and coronavirus. So how do we start or search? Of course, Google. You can use Google to compare keywords. You can, for example, say coronavirus, COVID-19, or corona, and see which keyword is the most effective. So you can see that people usually search for coronavirus, and COVID-19, it's pretty rare. And then corona is also used for, of course, the beer. And when I was beginning this research, and I was looking for copper and struck gold, because I began to understand what we were all looking for. In the beginning of the pandemic, using Google Trends, you can see like we were looking or searching for how to invest in stocks, how to do online yoga, how to beat boredom. And right now, the last trend is how to cook pancakes. So you have threat intelligence in action right there. You can put up a pancake parlor. Using Google Trends is easier for me, and I think it will be easier for you if you use this Python library. You have a library that is called PyTrends, in which you can begin with a single keyword, and you can begin doing kind of a lateral movement. You can begin to expand your search. So for example, you start with coronavirus, and then you will see, okay, people searching for coronavirus are also searching for COVID, for COVID-19. They are Googling for specific regions in the world, or specific phrases. So you can build your keyword data set and begin your research there. But of course, using open source intelligence sometimes is a little bit disappointing because you will see that everything is already out there. And this was a query that was done by the CDC, Center for Disease and Control in the US, that they were saying to all other researchers, and I don't mean information security researchers, just researchers in general, if you want to know about articles, blog posts, or any type of news regarding coronavirus, you can use these keywords or this specific query. So of course, I used that query as well. Okay, so we have the two time periods that I mentioned before. We have the keywords that we're going to use, but what about the tooling? What are we going to use to actually scrape content from Twitter? So we have Twitter IOC Hunter. I don't know if you know, this is a website. It's actually quite cool. It's twitterioc.com. The bad thing about this project is that I found out about it after I began my research. So I thought, man, someone beat me to the punch. Then you have Tweepy or Tweepy. That is actually quite useful if you want to post content to Twitter, if you want to post a tweet, or if you want to do a retweet. But to consume tweets, it's not that useful, and you have Twitter's API limitation. For our case, I think the most useful is Twint, and special thanks to Danny Cruz that was working on this way before me, and we had a nice conversation in our last great meeting. And this is a great tool because it doesn't have the limitation of the API. It does have some issues regarding the documentation. There is none. And also, now doing a query and trying to get tweets from a specific user is not working. I had everything working for this presentation. Then one day everything broke down, and I started, searching what happened in between when I did the first script and now. And so I found in this wiki page of the Twint project that suddenly everything broke down because something had changed in Twitter's backend. No one knew what, but it was broken. There are some hacks around it. You can still search for a user's tweets if you use the from modifier, but you cannot say, okay, get me all the tweets from S. Ponteroli. You need to do something else. So I felt like this, I don't know if you have seen this cartoon before, but I felt exactly like this. You always find the questions, but you never find the answers. And I thought, where are you, my Denver Coder 9? Eventually, I found out the real reason was the attack that Twitter suffered on July 16th. If you remember, several high-profile accounts got targeted, and they started posting about this Bitcoin scam. Twitter decided to change the backend to introduce a new and improved API, and of course, this new and improved API broke everything down. So, just a small recap. We have our query already. We know it could work, but we need to try it. So we're going to search for keywords such as Corona, COVID, COVID-19, coronavirus. We're going to search for MD5 and SHA-1 hashes, URLs. We already have the time periods, and I'm going to ask you a question that it's very difficult to do in a poll, so just think about it. If you were looking for URLs, which URLs would you use? So there is something that would help you find indicators of compromise in Twitter. And in the beginning, I thought, yeah, we have a hashtag that was indicators of compromise, or hashtag threat intel, but there is no consistency between everyone that is posting IOCs. So next, there is a video that is quite short because we have very little time. So please pay attention. So we just launched this script, and we start getting all the tweets that have that specific or those specific keywords, that contains the URLs that I asked you about, that contain the the two time frames. So from the beginning of this year until March 11, and from March 11 until nowadays. So we have all these tweets, and we can save them to a JSON file, or we can save them to a CSV file, and then we can parse it, and then we can store it whatever you want. Actually, it's quite easy with Twin to use Kibana or Elasticsearch. You can actually do something once you get all these samples. Question. So since the pandemic started, have you used any of the following sources to obtain indicators of compromise? And I ask you this because when the pandemic began, and I remember, of course, I think we all remember very vividly, there were a bunch of public sources for us as professionals to join. I remember Slack groups, GitHub groups, MISPs to connect to. So there were a lot of options, but I'm interested in what you are using right now. The numbers for the first period, and I have this little sad stitch in the bottom right, because for me 525 unique samples is pretty low, but still you need to have, or you need to take into consideration that these are indicators of compromise already shared by security professionals or by people in the community. So there is some higher degree of confidence that this might be more interesting. Still, as any open source data that you're going to use, you need to validate it, you need to add context, and you need to check, of course. You cannot say, of course, like, yeah, it's malicious because the query told me so. No, it doesn't work that way. So we have the top accounts that posted the most IOCs in the first period, Malware Hunter team, we have Security Doggo, a lot of people there, and the top hashtags, coronavirus, COVID, GReAT, InfoSec, and Malspam. The top sources are referring to those URLs that I told you before. I thought, what's the easiest way if looking at the user's tweets is not working anymore? So I thought, okay, I'm going to look for URLs such as VirusTotal, any.run, Hybrid Analysis, and any other threat exchange platform that is out there. So for the second period, that is from March 11 until nowadays, there was a 600% growth, but still 300 samples is not that much. One of the most surprising things for me was that between the sources appeared Malware Bazaar that, for me, usually I post whatever I find in VirusTotal. And if I need a sandbox, sometimes I might use any.run. But Malware Bazaar, it's quite an interesting result to see. And the hashtags change a little bit. You have COVID-19, cybersecurity, threat intel, suspicious, and malware. We have, again, Security Doggo. We have someone from Chile in the top 5. And Certigo Intel was the user that posted the most IOCs. And this is with my query. Your results might be different, of course. So, for the conclusions, open source intelligence adds another data point for validation or context. Might be less expensive, but you're trading money for time because you will spend a lot of time trying to fix things. And it can be useful to know about tendencies or trends, actually, before they become a trend. For example, you can search for specific malware families such as Emotet or, different ransomware families that are doing the rounds right now. And the bad thing about open source intelligence is that things will break. They will always break because you are scraping content from services that do not need to comply with your rules or your scripts. So they may introduce features, new features that will break everything. The problem of having too much data is real. It's really hard to filter out the noise, and it's really hard to validate what you get from all these queries. But for me, using open source intelligence can add another validation point to your research if used correctly, or even kickstart research. How many times have you seen like a new ATM malware or a new ransomware, and you just hear about it because some type of rumor on the internet, and then you start looking for more content? Well, that's the beauty of open source intelligence. Okay, so let's check your results. So what shall you, yeah, social media or open platform. Slack or Telegram groups was the least used, and I would say Slack is a nice thing to just communicate with each other, but not so much for IOCs. But Telegram right now, I think it's a gold mine for getting threat intelligence, especially from cyber criminal groups in Latin America, especially Brazil. Okay, just to give you a parting thought, tell me what you know, tell me what you don't know, and then tell me what you think. I will hold you accountable. It's really easy to get lost in a sea of information, but I think that you need to keep in mind that whatever we are doing, and especially with open source intelligence, what we are doing is getting something that we can act upon. Not knowing something sometimes is correct. For example, the hashtag Wuhan SARS was already blocked in the social network Weibo, I think in November or December last year. So that hashtag was present there, and then suddenly it disappeared. It was blocked, censored. So seeing something and then seeing how it disappeared is in itself something useful. So you need to keep your eyes open, you need to be vigilant, and of course, keep an historical record of what you do. Save those tweets, because as with the Twitter incident, you saw it in that very brief time frame of a couple of hours, and then everything disappeared.
So,
thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Santi. Please make sure you follow Santi at on Twitter at his.
No, I don't use Twitter. I just kidding.
No. Okay, so we will be moving to our AMA session, and then basically we will have all the questions that were asked during our presentation. We will be discussing them more in depth during the AMA session, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you, and like stay tuned, because now we finished all our presentations for today, and it's time to have some fun. So basically, I invite all speakers to join me, and we will start our AMA session, and we have plenty of interesting topics to discuss. I would like to start with Noushin first, and well, what's the time now?
It's almost 2 a.m.
2 a.m. and it's 27th of August, no?
Yes, it is.
You're in the future.
Yeah,
Wow,
I'm
wow.
do
we have like fully self-driving cars now? Like, tell us.
We have amazing things.
Oh wow, wow. Can we go to like other planets or like?
Yeah, you can. I just came back from another planet.
Oh wow! So the internet is good. The internet is also good between.
Better
Oh
wow,
wow, wow. So I'm looking forward for the future. You know, like this is crazy. This is crazy. So tell us, since you know so much, back there. I have a question from Walid, and he asked that if you stumble upon an encrypted binary on this IoT device, what kind of tools and approaches would you use to try to analyze it, to try to understand what the binary does?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So there are, it's quite common to have encrypted firmwares. If I'm not sure if he asked about the firmware or a binary inside the firmware, but I assume he asked about the firmware because I mentioned it briefly. It's very common to have an encrypted firmware when you download from the vendor's website. or you intercept network traffic while the device is getting updated. So it's not easy to deal with it, but I think what I would do is to first of all think about how this binary firmware binary is going to get decrypted and run on the device. So it might be through some code inside the mobile app that's supposed to use to update the binary, update the device with the binary, or it might be somewhere in the firmware of the device itself, like the previous firmware. So you can maybe look at the mobile application, try to do some reverse engineering to find the code that's supposed to decrypt the binary, or if you have access to the device, you can extract the firmware from the device, which should be unencrypted, and try to find the code that's used to decrypt the new firmware binary. If it's not the case, you can just try, I don't know, different tools that do, try to brute force, try to find patterns in the encrypted binary to see if you can guess how it got encrypted. But of course, in this case, you have a more like complicated challenge to deal with and complicated problem to solve.
But in the end, yeah, sorry. In the end, what I wanted to point out is that that binary has to be executed anyway. So somehow the operating system needs to decrypt it or needs to unpack it if it's a packed binary. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you can try to look for the code inside some other module or some other application that decrypts this binary.
So this goes to brings us another question, which is, do vendors, well, in your opinion and based on your research, do vendors, do you see, in general, we're not naming any vendor, do you see a trend where vendors are trying to increase the security of their IoT devices, or maybe they just leave it on the user side saying that, yeah, you have this device, you have to secure it yourself, we don't care? What do you think, Oleg?
So first of all, there are some rules introduced by like different governments, for example, in Australia, in UK, in different countries, in Singapore, in many countries, that force manufacturers and vendors to at least pay attention to some basic security practices, like putting the capability to change the default password, and some other stuff, like frequently update the firmware and so on. But still, I don't think the state of the security is very good at the moment in IoT devices. And I believe that it is the responsibility of the manufacturer. It doesn't make sense to leave it to the user, because most of the users, it's not like a, I don't know, very professional computer software that only specific people use. At the moment, IoT devices are everywhere. People use it, like people who don't have any idea about technology. They use it for, like, for example, the personal assistants or devices that are used mostly by older people, or any IoT device that you imagine in people's houses, in offices, and in like different places. Users don't know anything. Most users don't know anything about security and how to make their device secure. It's the responsibility of the vendor to make it secure. It doesn't make sense to leave it for the user.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Noushin. I would like now to move on to Mr. Giampaolo And we have an interesting topic that Mr. Dave Aitel mentioned, and he asked that about the malware Gianpaolo presented. He asked if is this something that can target networks without internet access? Hello, is Gianpaolo here? Yeah.
Yes.
Hello.
Can
Hello.
you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I
What do you
can
think?
answer yes and no. Let
Oh,
me
wow. Wow.
If you check the code, it contains all it contains some function which shows that the actor developed the USB worm to steal files from air-gapped networks. It contains the function, but the malware distributed in the wild can't use them because basically the logic of this program is if the system is not infected, try to download the thin client 5 times. If after 5 times the system is not infected, then start a function that will try to copy all files from the fixed drives to the removable drives. But there is an instruction in the code that prevents the counter to increase. So it will try to download the thin client or the first time, and that's all. It means the function used to steal the files from the local, from the fixed drives can't be executed. So they develop the code also to steal files from air-gapped network, but the USB worm in the wild can't be used for it. I don't know if this instruction was inserted by mistake or on purpose, but this is how it works.
That's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting. Okay, we'll just have to see if we find more samples or if we find new families of this malware. Maybe we'll see new capabilities.
I don't know. I found hundreds of samples, but I wasn't able to find a sample which worked correctly.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Okay, cool. So thanks a lot. We'll be moving to Mr. Santi now. And there are some questions regarding OSINT tools and doing OSINT apart from Twitter. Mr. Santi, you're here? Are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
So my first question is, my first question comes from from Mr. Walid, and he asks that you mentioned some free tools to do this, but you didn't mention any paid ones. Do you have like any suggestions, or like did you use any paid tools, or are they powerful enough in order to not reinvent the wheel?
That's a great question, especially the part of not reinventing the wheel. I fully agree on not doing that. As far as paid tools go, I would suggest Maltigo. For me, it's the most useful tool when it comes to open source intelligence. But in this case, it's not about just creating a whiteboard of all the samples or all the IOCs and understanding the threat. It's more about collecting samples. And for me, there is nothing that is customizable enough that already exists, not even as a paid tool. So I think for the moment there is a gap in the business. I mean, if someone wants to start developing an open source framework that connects Pastebin, Twitter, Facebook, blockchain, news articles, Slack, MISP, and everything, and you can pivot from one to the other, then you have like a good business idea. Please do it and give me a kickback of 30%. That's it.
Just 30%.
Yeah, just 30. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not greedy.
You're not greedy, you know. Not greedy,
yeah. No, but really, I think there is a gap in that aspect. So there are a bunch of isolated tools, but there is nothing that can adjust to whatever you want to do right now. And for me to solve this particular problem, it was reinventing the wheel. I'm sorry to say so. Yeah,
makes sense. Makes sense.
If not, pay for Maltigo.
Mr. Another viewer, Perfect Hernandez, asked, what groups from Telegram or Slack would you recommend? Or do you have any that maybe that are public or people can join?
Yeah, they were public. They were posted a bunch, like when the pandemic began. I don't remember out of memory, but
we will
I
have
can,
like a blog post. We will have a blog
okay,
post to follow up, and then we can.
Yeah,
So
I can
basically,
post
you
them.
have some. You have some recommendations of groups, and I know. Yeah.
Yeah, we have data feeds from, for example, GitHub, people posting there, and some free MISP feeds that you need to be vouched for, but you can also access. Even Twitter has a data stream that you can download that contains every single tweet that mentions coronavirus. And then for Slack, I don't remember it, but I can post it. If we do a blog post or any like webinar notes, I can add it there.
Okay, perfect. I remember that at least in Romania, when COVID started to get like a lot of people infected, and hospitals were actually like quite overwhelmed a bit. There was a time when hospitals were overwhelmed. I know there were some news about some hacker groups targeting hospitals. And they didn't target any hospitals in Romania, at least from what we know from public sources. But there were there was like an alliance of security researchers and people willing to just cooperate and join this alliance. And basically, they would offer free advice to hospitals. They would offer free information to hospitals, but also they would monitor this kind of stuff during like attacks during this pandemic. This is not related per se to OSINT, it's mostly related to COVID, but I would like to ask if these kind of initiatives are also, do you hear about any of these initiatives happening in LATAM?
Yeah, and also globally, I mean, in LATAM, there was one that Facebook did, and also they launched that one globally. It was a hackathon, so you would be helping doctors and people in the medicine sector with your IT knowledge, because of course maybe you are the sharpest and brightest doctor in the world, but you need a data scientist to help you. So there was this Facebook hackathon, and there also was a kind of a rent-a-coder or hacker for hire, things like that, but for free. So if you wanted to donate your time, you could post like, hey, I'm Santi, I want to donate my time, and if any doctor in the world needs help, I will be able to provide it. So yeah, I heard about those initiatives, and here in LATAM we had them as well.
Okay, makes sense. This makes sense. So thanks a lot, Santi. We are moving now to Noushin, and we have a last question for you. And basically, my question is, how would you recommend, or what would be like your solution for home end users to protect their home networks or to protect their SOHO devices? Like, I'm not talking about enterprise. For example, like VLANs and stuff like that. What's your take on this one?
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, a bit outside of the scope of
Yeah,
my research
of your
effort.
presentation, clearly. Yeah.
I guess, to be honest, I don't have good solutions.
So I know I talked to you about, and we discussed this a little bit earlier, basically to use strong passwords. You also mentioned that they should have like a WPA2 encryption for their Wi-Fi networks.
Yeah, of course, like the basic thing, have like protect your home network with strong passwords for your network. Use encrypted traffic on devices, and so on. Apart from that, if you are asking about IoT devices, I think it's good to mention that there are some vendors that that have like a specific hub for IoT devices, and different devices can only communicate to that hub. I think that's a better solution compared to having every single device exposed to internet and connected to internet individually. So it's much easier to protect one device rather than protecting every single device.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you. I hope that now that our listeners are a little bit more protected, or they can take some of the advice that you presented. We are moving on to an interesting topic, and we are going on the topic of cyber-mercenaries. And there were a lot of questions back there, but I would like to start with a question from Mr. Mo Bustami, if I pronounced it correctly. And basically, he asked that a mercenary is usually hired by someone based on your telemetry or analysis. Do you have an idea of who is behind hiring this group? Is it a competitor? If it is a gov entity, especially with this such wide targeting? And I think this is Maher who wanted to answer.
Yep. So interesting question. Obviously, it's almost impossible to know this from pure telemetry, obviously. So, but if we give a bit of context for the data stolen or for the potential of data stolen based on the capabilities of the malware, obviously, it's someone who wants to dig further into someone else's business, maybe dig some dirt, maybe dig some intelligence on the business itself, and so on. Why is this important? In my assessment, I think it's possible that someone wants to be more competitive in the market. They want to understand the market better. So that's why they would probably hire someone to get that information on their behalf. Again, it's just an assessment. It's just, I think that's plausible enough. Otherwise, why would someone get data from a law firm, then go to a financial institution, then go for a diplomatic entity, and so on? Even the type of data, sometimes it's audio recordings, sometimes it's I don't know, private information, browser and user credentials, and so on. So it's really not straightforward, but the most plausible, I think, hypothesis is it's a hacker for hire group who provide this information to someone who paid them to do so. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Also, continuing this topic, I would like to ask Ivan, what's his idea of, do you see cyber mercenaries like targeting platforms like OS X or Linux, Unix boxes, or only Windows ones?
So when it comes to this Death Stalker group, we haven't seen them target those platforms recently, although we know that the GReAT platform has been used in the past against macOS targets. Actually, it's the reason why GReAT, I think around 2015, got some publicity. So currently, I don't think they're really going after those targets, or maybe we don't know about it, but they definitely have the capability, and in fact, they've been doing that for years.
Okay, thank you.
Even if I may add, even
yeah,
Dan,
sure,
so
sure.
At the last steps, or the last, if you want, the action on objectives, most of these, if not all of these malware families, use Python. So the possibilities are there to use the same malware in multi-platforms, because Python obviously can be used in Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Yeah, absolutely.
Specifically, yeah.
Same works with JavaScript.
Exactly.
So do you think those kind of attachments would have like good success rate, like trying infecting operating systems that are running EDR or AVs installed, or like cyber criminals, they try to use 0 days to like bypass these protections? What do you think?
So So in all these intrusion chains or intrusion cycles, we have seen them use obviously PowerShell, C script. So if you consider those part of the load balancers, then yes. But basically they are using those to load PowerShell, to load JavaScript, and then load additional toolset from the internet. So they do partially use load balancers, but they mostly use Python as the last stage.
Okay, okay, thank you. And let's discuss the poll results a bit. I think they were quite controversial. Interesting, yeah, interesting, yeah. Can you? I think we're gonna focus on the first question. No, like, did you consider this cyber-mercenaries a threat for your organization or not? No, and a lot of people they answered. They would you like to discuss the results?
More than half answered no.
Yeah, yeah, more have answered no. What's your take on this one?
I think it's because the most of the threat intel on the internet, whether it be OSINT or otherwise, I think the focus mainly is on state-sponsored espionage, standard espionage, cyber criminals. Most of the time, we don't see much of cyber mercenaries. We don't see much of insider threats, techniques exposed, and so on. I think that's why. So the bias is there for state-sponsored espionage and cyber criminals. At least this is my take on it. I don't know. Ivan, do you have any other feedback on this?
No, I think I would agree. I think if we hadn't suggested cyber mercenaries, if we had just asked people what their threat model was, I think the results, the mentions for cyber mercenaries would have been even lower. So probably it's on us to raise awareness on those threat actors. And also, as I mentioned during the presentation, when I was commenting the results of the poll, probably we'd also have to think about the population that's answering those questions, because probably some people that are here today and attending the webinar are not part of organizations that are likely to be targeted by mercenaries. Probably people that are working in IT for SMBs are not here today, and I think if they were, maybe the results would be different.
Okay, okay.
Yep.
Well, anything else you want to add? If not, I would like to ask you one last questions. Do you think those kind of like cyber mercenaries are sophisticated enough to have like and powerful enough to have like access to $1 million 0 days, or like to buy like 0 days, which could impact a lot of systems? Or like how much powerful and how much organized they are, like, or do you think they will be in the future?
Well, I think this is maybe somewhat a misleading question. First observation for me would be that you get the attackers you deserve. And for most targets that are going to be concerned with mercenary groups, those are not targets that you need 0 days to breach, right? So maybe the mercenary companies behind those groups, maybe they do own the 0 days. Maybe they are actually able to leverage to gather the capabilities that would be needed to obtain such tools. But the thing is, they really don't need them. And I think that until they do, this question doesn't really make sense.
Okay. Yeah, valid point. And lastly, I would like to go to discuss a bit a question about the HolyWater research. And basically, the question is like, what do you see for the future? What do you think is going to happen in the future? Like, do you have any ideas of like what you could expect?
You're obsessed with the future today.
Well, Noushin is here, so like.
I can try to start answering that.
Okay.
I think we will all have to have something to say about this, but the fact is, for now, they probably understand that they have been discovered because of incident response efforts, because of our publications. And well, the natural reaction would be to start developing better evasion capabilities, because they did not even try to be evasive right now. So they will most probably start to do that in the future. And the only other idea I have on that is that they may still use open source code, because that's quite efficient. Actually, you just have to custom a part of the source code, and you have an efficient implant to deploy. And this is making the attribution and classification more difficult to the researchers. So they may keep doing that in the future as well.
Yeah, I think this is a good point from Pierre. The thing is, we were not able to link this attribution, this thread group to an existing threat actor. And at the moment, we cannot say whether it's a APT number X or Panda number Y behind this group. And we are not able to make those calls, just because the attackers have only been relying on open source tools or old code bases that we could not link with something new. But apart from this, I think this is a methodology they're likely to keep using in the future. That being said, yeah, I think we're just going to see more of the same from this attacker. I think they're very focused attention to one specific ethnic minority is going to remain the same and change in the future. And I think their TTPs probably are going to get honed over time, but probably they're still in the experimentation phase. And they're still going to try out various tools, see what works. And then maybe in a few years, they'll have more established, more solid methodologies.
Yeah, and basically we can compare them to like a startup. Basically, in a startup, you start small. You start building your knowledge and your programs, but you do good stuff. Similar, they do kind of the same. They start and they enrich their knowledge. They might hire other cyber criminals. Like the market is. Like there's a lot of attacks, and more and more attackers are getting interested in attacking in different entities, mostly because I think their main reason is like earning money. I think that's the first motivator for these attack groups. Then they might have other agenda. Okay, so I think this is it. I would like to wrap up for today. I would like to thank all the speakers for their hard work. We will be contacting the winners of the two prizes later next week. And also, don't forget to join our upcoming expert talk, why you have to master Yara, from routine to extreme threat hunting cases. So the webinar will happen on the 3rd of September. I will drop the link for the webinar, which you can attend for free. I will drop it in the chat. And also, don't forget our SAS online conference, which will happen 6th to 8th of October this year. There's still plenty of time to submit your research. So please check the Twitter channels, check our website, thesascon.com, and submit your cool research. Also, thanks a lot for attending our 3rd GReAT Ideas powered by SAS. And this concludes our summer events. Our next GReAT Ideas will happen in winter. We will continue in winter. We're just taking a short break because there's like SAS event, and there's also some other research that is being researched right now. And we will be meeting with you in winter, probably in December. Details will be we will like release more details a little bit later. Thanks a lot everybody for participating. I hope it was like interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot to all the speakers. Thank you, future Noushin, for staying with us so late. I think it's like super late right now. And thanks to all the questions, all the good questions, and let's keep the research going. Thanks for joining, and see you at SAS Online. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks to you, Master of Ceremony. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much. I have some 8-bit music now for you.
Oh yeah, please.
Oh, thanks.